Well, hello again. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world right now, and welcome to today's webinar about climbing the career ladder. I'm Eline, Learning and Development Advisor at Antwerp Management School, and I will be moderating today's session. So before we start, some practical information. I will keep an eye on the chat for the entire duration of the webinar, so feel free to post any question that you have for the two speakers of today and make sure to address them to everyone. So indicate that when you post your question, and the Q&A will be at the end of today's webinar. And so also by means of introduction, it would be nice if you could just in the chat indicate your name, job title, and the organization that you work for, just so that we have a feel of who is in today's session, and also for you, of course, that you don't have the feeling that you're all alone at home or at work. So almost there, the webinar takes 1 hour and 30 minutes, so we will end at 12:30. And it will also be recorded. So afterwards, you will still receive a follow-up email with the recording and the slides. And that's it from my part. And then I have the pleasure of introducing you to our two speakers, Professor Geert Scheipers and Professor Steven Poelmans. Geert Scheipers is an expert in strategy, management control, and performance management, and Professor Steven Poelmans is an expert in organizational behavior and leadership. Geert, you are the first one, so I give the floor to you. Enjoy.
Thank you, Eline. It's great to be here, and it's good to see you all. It's a pleasure for us to share with you one of our topics that we've been discussing the last couple of months. And it's an interesting one. And actually, I think it also fits very well the time that we're in now. So many of us have children, or we see children going back to school after great summer holidays, hopefully for most of them, great summer holidays. And even after the COVID period, it was quite daunting to go back to our schools. And the same can be true for entering a new job, a new role, or a new function. So that's why Steven and I, we discussed how could our fields actually help leaders, new leaders, existing leaders in addressing the challenges that you might have when entering a new job, a new role, or a new function. And there is quite something to tell from the field of strategy management, but obviously also, as my colleague will demonstrate, from the field of leadership. So let's start with how we think from strategy management we can help you in addressing the challenges that you might have, the thrill that you might have when entering a new role. And we see after COVID that a lot of you probably have shifted their paths in their career. It was a great opportunity to reflect. As crises are, and they are moments of challenge, moments of peril that also make us think. So where are we in our life? What should we do with our lives? How can we progress in our careers? And what is that career that we're looking for? So we see a lot of people shifting roles. But then what to do when shifting roles? Because entering a new role is not just signing a new contract or addressing a mail that you got from one of your colleagues, like saying, hey, we have a great opportunity for you. No, it deals with addressing complexity. It actually deals with how to drive your future, but not just your own future, also the future of your teammates, of your colleagues within that new setting. And addressing these challenges, addressing the new roles in the job that you have. And can I ask Eline just to go back to the slides, because I can't click to my next slides and I want to talk about the future. So in entering your new role, it's all about thriving in complexity, thriving in our ambiguous, volatile, and uncertain world. And how then can we define our own future? Complexity theory teaches us that the future builds on patterns of relationship in the details of little events that occur every day routines that exist within an organization. It's our role as leaders to identify what are these variables that we can act upon and how are these variables changing. Some of them might be big and so humongous that we can't even see them anymore because they are so obvious in our day-to-day life. Some are so tiny and small that we also have difficulties in identifying them. But we should. So the role of leaders entering a new role is looking at these patterns of relationship within your new context. At the same time, it's looking at events and variations that occur at all times. And these events and variations, they can shift dramatically, like we've seen with the COVID crisis and the many other crises that you've probably experienced in your personal life or in societal life. But they can also be quite small or subtle, so to speak. So our job is to look for these details in these different elements amongst us, and at the same time look at the events and the variations, because the combination of both of them, they will define the future. And as such, we can say that our future is systemic. So it's important to see where the different variables are that can help us to drive our future. At the same time, future can be path dependent, meaning that whatever our future will be, there is always something that lies in the current, in the day-to-day that we can build on. So identifying these things is important. But sure, as I said, this comes from complexity theory, and complexity theory is, as we all know, quite complicated. That's why at Antwerp Management School, to give you guidance, we've developed a simple plan, a very simple model that can help organizations, teams, and individuals to drive their own future. In order to address the future, we need to first define what our future could look like. What is the type of performance that we're going for? That performance, more in a kind of a more philosophical way expressed, can also be named our success. It can also even mean to us individuals our well-being, or a kind of a feeling of joy and happiness that can occur. The question is, then what drives this performance on a systemic basis? And it's quite simple. It comes from effort. In order to, for us colleagues to give this webinar for you today, we also needed to get up. We needed to be prepared. We need to stroll our sleeves up and say, hey, let's do something with all the knowledge that we have and share it with you. That's the effort that we need to exert on a day-to-day basis. In organization, that effort is being made visible through processes and projects. Then the question comes, where does that effort come from? And that is quite obvious. It does drive on motivation. So our job as leaders in a new function is not just to define the performance level, not to just ensure that effort is exerted, but more importantly, that motivation is in place and that we focus not just on extrinsic motivation, but also on intrinsic motivation. You'd all say, you introduced a simple plan. This is probably too simple for us, because in my organization, in my experience, I have some references that this model did not work that well. So let me expand the model. So 2 more extra variables in between motivation and effort, and in between effort and performance. You'll see those variables will describe the full model. Based on our motivation, indeed, we needed to allocate scarce resources, and we needed to develop capabilities for us as an organization. So your role in your new function is also identify where lay these talents of your team members. What is it that makes us unique, or what is it that potentially gives us value for the future? And these resources for all of us are scarce. This morning, I needed to get up. I needed to find, I needed to find my bicycle because I came here by bike to Antwerp Management School. So that's an asset that we have to have in place. But there's also needed to make sure that I could bring you some valuable content today. So those are the things, the insights that we wanted to share with you. Next to those two resources, we also have time. We also have the monetary resources. And the bundle of all these things is something that we need to allocate as leaders. So motivation combined with the allocation of these scarce resources and capabilities drives the relevant effort. But that effort only can be translated into performance if we truly direct our team. And as a whole, this simple plan will help you to define your future, your desired future. And it can be that simple. You can use this model from the via positiva just to identify where can I improve, but you can also use this model from the via negativa to identify where are the issues, where are the items that don't function in my team, in my setting, in my personal life, and where can I alter them, optimize them, satisfy them in order to drive sustainable performance. And that brings us to how we define strategy management. Your role as a leader within a new function, within a new team, within a new mission is to ensure that we drive the performance. How can we do that? By having a strategy. All of you will know that having a strategy is key to your sustainable success. We define strategy as an explicit shared model for judgment and decision-making that describes how you as an organization, or you as a team member, or you even as an individual will be successful. Strategy management then is a continuous process of translating that strategy into tangible outcomes. And the idea of a continuous process is key to strategy management. This is not a one-off event. So not like on the first day of your new assignment, of your new mission, you enter into the room and say, hey, I have a bright set of ideas. These are them. Let's please execute. No, it's a continuous process of observing, seeing what goes well, trying to internalize things that have changed, and then reviewing your model, mental model, as I described, in order to optimize for the better on a continuous basis. Now, if we see, many of us have challenges in applying a great theory, a great set of concepts like that. And it's something that we see in many organizations, in many cases. Hence, we try to devise a set of heuristic, simple rules that can help you, guide you in delivering a good job in your new roles. And they're quite simple, hence our set of simple rules. And there are only 5 of them. So we call them strategy management principles. First one is start with the end in mind. Define yourself a purpose. Be very clear and explicit on your mission and work from that in order to devise a strategy. So your strategy should start from the end in mind. Secondly, everyone will probably know we should make choices. As I said in the beginning, our resources are scarce. So all of us only have a limited amount of these resources. So we need to allocate them in the most optimal way. So that entails also making these choices. And that's challenging because there are so many opportunities. There are so many things that we could do. We need to make choices in order not to overconsume your people, in order also to have a coherent picture on the future, in order to have a clear view on what you as an organization stand for, hence inviting your consumers and your customers to go along with you, hence to invite your colleagues to say, hey, we will contribute to this. So making these hard choices, principle number 2. Principle number 3 is to make sure that you can manage a set of activities, a coherent set of activities, but that you also create a fit amongst these critical activities. So identifying these critical activities, but then making sure that all of these fit together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle is the third principle that you need to apply. Fourth principle then is if you have a strategy, you need to develop a organizational system. And to my students, I often refer to an operating system, like the software operating system on your laptop, that needs to be in place in order to drive your organization towards the realization of your strategy. And finally, as I said, this is a continuous process. And along this continuous process, there will be changes to the better, changes to the worse, but you need to adapt yourself. So you need to be flexible and in certain settings also be the change that you can drive for your business, for your activities, for your department. So these 5 principles, they're all quite simple, but you need to apply them in a consistent way. You can even recall them by referring to the digits of your hand. And so let's go over each of these 5 digits, each of these 5 principles to help you guide and become the best possible you in your new role. So first one, start with the end in mind. That deals with identifying the boundaries that you operate within. Yeah? Making sure that you have a clear description of the framework that you're operating. And in the past, we called this a mission, the role to fulfill, those objectives that you agreed upon, that were given to you by your stakeholders, and that you said, yes, let's commit to that. Lately, we call it purpose. That's more inspirational. It gives you your clear view on why you are there as a leader, as a team, as an organization. That mission and your purpose that truly defines this is the direction that we're heading at. This is what we want to maximize over time. And you see later that identification of what you are going to maximize is key in order later on to define the activities that you will need to put in place in order to maximize the mission and your purpose. And actually, the mission and the purpose, linking them back to your key activities, also helps you to link your brain and your soul, to be analytic and at the same time be very inspirational in what you do. And I'm pretty sure that my colleague will talk about all these elements later on when he refers to the leadership aspects too. So Nanaka and Takuchi were right, so that you as a leader should be very analytical in order to position your organization, but at the same time need also to be aware and sensitive to what lives within your organization and identify the soul of your organization. Second principle is ensuring fit amongst your critical activities. So this is the third one. And that is key in order to help you define these activities, help you make sure that all the things that you do in your organization deliver on that mission, on your purpose, deliver on the choices that you've all made. And so there, we should also identify these components that reinforce each other. So it's like a living system. It's like an ecosystem. Things that help each other, build on each other, can thrive on each other. So it's a collection of parts, which also means that you as an organization can strengthen yourself by identifying these different components within things that you need to do at once. Every organization has these critical activities. And by identifying them and by focusing on them and by working on them, you can make sure that you'll build your competitive advantage. And that competitive advantage as a system also helps you to make sure that you can be an organization that is not easily been replaced by something else. You can deliver products and services that are hard to imitate because it's a combination of things. That fit amongst your critical activities also implies identifying how to do this. You need to first focus on what has been asked by the market. So where is the job to be done for your organization, your team, you as an individual, in order to provide services? Secondly, make sure that these combinations fit with each other. These activities do belong to each other as a system. They need to be balanced with each other and they need to be interrelated. And if we do this well, if you as a leader can identify these activities, ensure that the system is there in place in order to deliver on your mission and your purpose, in order to execute the choices that you've made, that helps you also to improve over time. And improving over time, that refers back to that journey that we're on, the journey that we've embarked on together, you and your team. So these are the things that we need to take in place. The essence of strategy are in the activities that we do. Now, and if you have a strategy with your mission and your purpose, with the choices that you've made, and with the set of activities that we need to work on, question is, how can we then work on these things? And that brings us to the fourth principle, making sure that we build that operating system, hence the metaphor towards my organizational system, in order to make sure that we can deliver on our strategy. And there we refer to another picture that we always place in the minds of our students in referring to a PA system when you go to a concert. If you're in a concert, and surely the actors are in front on stage, they shine, but actually the quality of that performance is been managed and enabled by a PA system standing in the middle of the crowd, where people feel how the music comes across to the audience, and then when a different set of levers are tuned as such that we can get that great experience from the performance on stage. And so that's also what we do when talking about an organizational system. Because having a strategy is one thing, implementing that strategy is a second thing. And it's there where organizations often struggle. It's there where leaders often lose the inspiration. Because, we can all come with a strategy. It's fun to go on an offsite to define a strategy with your new team, but then implementing it is where the true distinction can be made of successful organization and less successful organizations. Now, designing that organizational system can come from 5 dimensions. The first dimension is the organizational structure. And you've probably heard of the saying, structure should follow strategy. So we translate the strategy into a structure where roles and responsibilities, but even more important, coordination mechanisms are put in place in order to make sure that we as a group of people within the organization, even broader, with different partners, can work together in concert in order to deliver on that strategy. Secondly, we need to define our boundaries. We need to be clear in referring to the mission and the purpose, and referring to the strategy, referring to the choices, referring to these critical activities. So please continuously refer to your strategy. That's the second component. And then how we then drive your strategy in terms of demeanor within the organization is the third element. It's what we call culture. How people are driven and work together in order to deliver on that. And managing a culture, creating a culture, shaping a culture over time is a challenging task, but a very interesting task at the same time. Because culture truly defines how we act with each other, amongst each other. And some organizations truly distinct themselves from others by means of their culture. What I'm trying to say here is the importance of culture, and culture fits within that set of 5. Because next to culture, we also need to talk about the diagnostical systems. How do we measure performance? How do we follow up on our strategies? How do we see that our initiatives that we took are really successful? And that helps us to develop a scorecard, a dashboard, in order to observe where things are good, where things are substandard, and how to evolve in delivering on that strategy. So you as a leader, it's not just having a set of indicators, not just looking at your report, but understanding how the indicators link to your strategy, and also understanding how these indicators motivate or demotivate your people. Finally, we refer to interactive controls. Interactive controls are those activities that we put in place, those routines that we build in organizations to have dialogues, continuous dialogues, interchange of information within the organization, to make sure that we learn from failures, that we learn from doing, that we learn with each other how we as a team, how we as individuals, how we as an organization fit within that dynamic context that I've introduced in the beginning. Now, this system is so important, and it needs to be tuned continuously. You're there like the DJ that tunes the different levers in order for your audience to have the best possible experience, as I've laid out. Now, importantly, this system for many organizations is quite stable, is quite strict, is quite fixed, and that shouldn't be the case. So you need to ensure that you have enough slack in order to adapt yourself. Translate the new observations that you do in how you deliver on your strategy. Observe how the environment around you in which you operate has changed, and then translate that back to your strategy first, but then later also to your organizational system. So that's the fourth principle in strategy management. And Marquides says, actually, we should do this continuously. As one of our, the more renowned writers and scholars in strategy management, he refers to the idea that these routines and these norms, they need to be referred to, and we need to reflect on them, how successful we are. And we should be open to change our paradigms. That brings us to the final principle. And that final principle is making sure that you as a leader, with all your good intentions, with all your good effort, with all your energy and inspiration that you have, make sure that you adapt yourself to the changing environment. Question yourself in how you operate. We often refer to the idea of never being satisfied with the status quo. Or, put more positively, ensure that you are dissatisfied with the status quo. So that is also a very important role for you as new leaders, is to identify where the status quo lays, see where the status quo needs to be maintained, because that's relevant because of your critical activities, but then also challenge that status quo every now and then and see where things can be optimized, can be made better in order to be more successful. One important advice for you to be given is that many organizations are not that good at it. And it's often newer organizations who can truly be disruptive. You've probably heard of the term of disruptive. And I think you, in a new role, in your new position, given that new mission, are well positioned in order to look at the organization, observe it from a distance, and challenge the current paradigms. Because breaking the rules of a game, making sure that we do not continue the consistency in the organization and challenge it, is often something that only occurs in very small organizations, new organizations. And if you are given the opportunity to pick up a new role, then you can act as that niche player. You can act as a true disruptor. The reasons for organizations to remain to the status quo and to remain solid are so obvious. it's inertia, it's politics, it's complacency, it's fear of doing things differently. And those are things that we want to share with you in order to overcome. When you enjoy the challenge of working on a new role, as engaging with a new function, maybe this is the time to stand up and say, we're gonna do things different. So those are the things that we in strategic management see, the principles that we in strategic management try to provide to organizations, teams, and leaders in order to become their best possible them. So that is the advice that I wanted to bring to you today. And in a whole, with picking up your new role, my advice to you is dare to do great things, built on the logic that we share with you today, and be yourself. Be absolutely loyal to yourself. So that gives me the opportunity to hand over the talk to my colleague, Steven Poelmans, who actually for us at Antwerp Management School came in as a very strong, powerful leader in helping us in strategy management also to build on our leadership capabilities. So Steven.
Thank you, Geert. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you're connecting from. And I will be continuing this talk. I was just thinking that Geert and I are also the co-teachers in the program Business Strategy and Leadership. So if you want to learn more about all this content, you can find us there. In a way, maybe we're a bit like yin and yang, right? Where Geert was mostly focusing on the male principle of yang, of structure and clarity. I will allow myself to go to the yin, then the female principle of the individual and leadership. So here we go. So the original title was Climbing the Career Ladder. I put sort of the question mark behind it because when you dig a bit deeper into the new tendencies around careers and career paths, I think probably navigating the career grid would be a better way of approaching it. And I will explain this in a moment in more detail. So let's start with the context and the consequences. Yeah, and so basically what we need to do is to get a better picture of what is going on in our environment, what are the things that are changing, and of course, the big forces that have been influencing our context has been digitalization, which has been accelerated by the pandemic. And as a consequence of that, also virtualization, where more and more we find ourselves working remotely from home or from the office in virtual teams, in increasingly international and global teams with people of very different cultures and diverse backgrounds. And so that new reality that is becoming more and more clear for everyone working in knowledge society is something that we need to take into account. So in order to look at the future in a way, we can look at the present in sectors where this digitalization and virtualization has been going on for a while already, which is of course everything which has to do with knowledge sector, with computer and information technology, everything which has to do with software and artificial intelligence. So I'm going to reflect a bit on those tendencies in order to inspire you what are some of the challenges that we face when we are managing a career in this new environment. Okay, so I refer to it as navigating the grid. It is not a two-dimensional ladder. It is a grid with 3 or even 4 dimensions. And one way of defining grid is using a sort of an abbreviation, the acronym of GRID, to look at the environment. So the environment we're living in and some of you are entering in is the 4G economy, based on the concept of the fourth revolution, of revolution building on top of revolution. The third wave is referred to as the digital wave. We are in the midst of it. We're still in the tail of it, of course. But on top of that, there's a new wave building of new sciences that are inspiring, like artificial intelligence, like neurosciences, like microbiology, like genetic engineering, all this type of sciences that are now inspiring new artifacts that are starting to influence as well in our day-to-day activity, like robots, like drones, like smart machines, like artificial intelligence. At the same time, our environment, and I think the recent pandemic has been only a first taste of that, I think. We will get more of that, so get ready of radical disruptions we will have to confront, where the rules that seem to be obvious at one stage are completely changed in a very little time. So that's a second element that we need to take into account with, and that's also going to be true for you building your career. You have to be prepared for radical disruptions and willing to redefine yourself in order to be adapted to this new environment. The other thing that we see arising in our environment are interconnected ecosystems. So more and more we see smaller and larger organizations collaborating with each other, whether they're connected together in a supply chain or in a retail channel, or when they're actually partnering up, becoming allies to license some of the technology to each other to help each other, or smaller companies being acquired by larger companies working together now. There are so many ways where we can see that the landscape of organizations changing, and even competitors coordinating with each other in what we call larger ecosystems. Ecosystems that are organized around a sort of a common wicked problem that needs to be solved, that one company alone cannot solve. So that's another tendency we clearly see with many larger and bigger organizations reconfiguring and collaborating. And of course, there's the tendency of digitalization. As I said, we're still in the process of that. A lot of companies are still going through this process of digitalization. And those that have gone through the first and the second rounds of digitalization realize they have still other rounds to come. For instance, the use of artificial intelligence for a lot of companies is something still relatively new. So that's sort of the context we work in. My proposal in terms of managing or navigating your career in this type of strange environment is for you to be guided. That's very important. We will talk about in a moment that more and more we have to manage what we call protean careers, and the capability like Proteus, which was a Greek mythological figure that could shift its shape. We have to be able to shift and change our shape in the course of our career, right? So, and we need to take charge of this ourselves. Organizations will be less and less interested and preoccupied with managing our long-term career. They will be interested in managing our actual job and maybe the next 3 or 4 years. But they know as well that people shift and change. So the focus will be different. Doesn't mean that you still need guidance. So we need a guided, radial. I will explain this more in detail also later, don't worry. Radial means that we start from a core identity of how we see ourselves. And I'm going to ask your opinion in a moment of how you see your core self, and radiating from that in concentric circles, we will see that there will be different levels of engagement, commitment, loyalty as we engage with other types of organizations and individuals. It will be a career where we strongly independent, at the same time interdependent. We see strong tendency of people to strive for establishing themselves as independent workers. And I think the whole pandemic and people working from home has even more stronger, this tendency to be autonomous. And it also responds to a basic factor in neuroscience that has been clearly discovered and confirmed. I would say psychology also talked about this. There's a strong need for autonomy, which is something the brain looks for. And there's development, continuous development, because standing still is basically losing terrain. So I'm going to argue those different points in the next half an hour. Okay, so let's start with this context. And I'm going to refer to a study, a publication by McKinsey, Rethinking Work in the Digital Age. And there are 7 tendencies put out there. I'm going to only focus on the first 4. So the first 4 tendency, when we think, sorry, I have to go back. Can I still do this? Yes. So the first tendency that we have to talk about is from bundled to rebundled. So Geert was already referring to this in his talk as well, where we have to rethink all those different pieces of the puzzle, of the jigsaw puzzle, and reconfigure them. And this will also happen at the individual level. And so an important task of a leader will be to rethink those different pieces and to reconfigure. A very important task of HR will be also to help leaders in reconfiguring, because we have to also make a transition from still very classical job descriptions or management by objectives, by reconfiguring how a particular job is being put together. And the reason why we need to rebundle are many. So if you take into account that about 70% of jobs in about 20% of occupations will be automated, could be automated and will be automated, that means that we have to start collaborating with these automats, with these artificial intelligences, with these machines. And so part of the rebundling, which is good news for the human being, by the way, because we will get rid of the boring jobs, right? But it means that we need to rebundle. Right? We need to look at different tasks, chop them up in little pieces, see what can be done by the machine, what can be done by me, to make optimal use of the human intellectual power. It's also about rebundling in cross-functional interdisciplinary teams. That's another tendency we see as teams become more and more virtual, and we are sort of rethinking the way you have to work in more agile teams. We see that teams more and more are put together by people of different functions. And so there as well, we will see a tendency that all those members in those cross-functional teams will become more cross-functional. So we will reflect also this polyvalence in each and individual person in order to be able to work with those different disciplines. So the classical job of being in finance or being in marketing will be something of the past. We will all have to have inside of us an aspect of marketing, of finance, of HR, and think in a holistic way. There is also, of course, the rebundling of tasks to combine human intelligence and artificial intelligence. They have to work together at some point in time. And so combine all those things together, we will have to be able to rebundle different tasks in function of different goals that we have and collaborate in those cross-functional teams. The second tendency is going from occupations to project-based work, where you define your identity around an occupation, typically based on some diploma. The future of all of us, and there will be no exceptions, is that we will work more on project-based. Short-term projects, mid-long, and long-term projects. And once again, it fits with the logic that Geert just described to you, where in function of different markets, we will have different products and different services that need to be launched by a particular time, that need to be constantly revised in an agile way. So the best way to do that is based on project work. The third tendency, and I just wanted to point out, is going from salaried job to independent work. That's another important tendency. So there's a poll, a survey that has shown that about 25% of people in currently traditional jobs would prefer to become independent workers. 25%, that's 1 out of 4, right? And that's what they would like to. Right? We will also see that organizations, and to become more lean and to have less costs, will also actually welcome this. They will welcome workers that have a preference to work in an independent way, because they don't have to carry also the social costs associated with this particular job. But it's also the tendency for people to like to be more flexible, to be more autonomous, and to combine different facets in their life. I will come back to this also in a moment. So there's this tendency towards more autonomy, more control, more telework, more hybrid work, more self-employment, and the success of that can be seen very easily by the success of online labor platforms like Upwork, freelancer.com, Uber, TaskRabbit, all those different websites that actually allow people to find jobs, being independent, being self-employed, and have a full-time job, more than that, and to make money in this way. I think an interesting example here that really blew my mind when I read about this is Topcoder. Topcoder is a company. They're a crowdsourcer of software development, and they have a community of 750,000 engineers, 750,000 engineers who, next to their normal day jobs, do extra jobs collaborating in communities around solutions. So it might actually well be, if you're an employer, that a range of your engineers that you think that are working for you are actually doing extra jobs for other companies through these type of platforms. So it's a tendency that we will not be able to stop, because it really appeals to a human nature to be autonomous, to be self-sufficient, to be able to take care of yourselves. If you have been a victim of several rounds of losing your job because of the pandemic, because of financial crises, you start to develop this tendency to protect yourself and to take care of yourself. And the first one, of course, is the tendency to go from educational credentials to intrinsics reflected in data. Right? So what does that mean? That we as a management school, we're still preparing people for particular educational backgrounds, that we also have to rethink the way that we teach people in our programs in order to be able to think in this other way, which is that your diploma is not enough anymore. And actually, research has shown, this is a study by Catalyst DevWorks that looked at hundreds of thousands of IT managers. They don't exactly mention an exact number, but it's more than 100,000 IT system managers. And they found no correlation at all between college degrees and professional success, right? Because what is the reason? The explanation they gave, because creativity and initiative are essential also in this type of jobs. And they're less related with your diploma, even in STEM diplomas or backgrounds. So that's another tendency that we will see, is that as people are more and more collaborating in a virtual environment using virtual platforms to organize work, it's going to be much easier using big data to actually link performance and success, the things that Geert was also referring to before. So for instance, Microsoft in this pandemic has sort of used ways of defining micro tasks, following them up, and actually saw that, yeah, it should not be a surprise that different people are more motivated by a certain particular type of tasks. We can measure it very, very exactly. And in function of those measurements, we can look for a better fit between the person and the tasks and the responsibilities they have to do. Based on this big data and these more refined, granular connections between efforts and performance and rewards that Geert was also referring to, we can have better fits between people and jobs that need to be reconfigured. As I said before, they need to be rebundled in a way as well. Okay, so these are some of the major tendencies that I think we need to take into account. We can sort of look into the future by looking at the present in this particular sector that has been already working in a more digital and virtual way for a while now. Okay, so what does it now mean for careers? Well, I think that you can see me coming, right? The classical picture of the career ladder, where you have one way up, where basically you work yourself up in an organization through different layers of hierarchy, is still going to exist. I won't deny it, but it will be only one of the many alternatives. So in order to check in with you, I'm curious to see where you stand. I've prepared a little poll, and this is to see how you see yourself if given a choice. So imagine you can make a free choice for a moment, don't worry too much about the money. The money will come, okay? I can assure you, for some people, it's a bit scary to let go of a full-time job as a salaried person. But I would like you to look at all these different combinations and possibilities, right? Which one, if given a choice, would you prefer? Would you actually prefer to work full-time as a salaried manager and to develop a professional career in one company? So that's the option that was sort of the traditional choice, and they will continue to exist. So don't worry, it's still there. Will you prefer to work as a salaried expert or consultant within one company, but for multiple clients? Would you like to work full-time as a salaried manager, or more as a serial, what I call serial professional career, where you will job hop to different companies in the course of your career, and every time you make a transition, you improve your conditions, but as a whole, there's a logical flow there. Do you see yourself working full-time as an entrepreneur or a family business owner? Would you like to go for that? Would you like to combine part-time employment for a company with being your own business owner? Would you like to combine part-time employment and part-time self-employment for the same company? So this is the idea where you are on the payroll for this company, but you also do freelance jobs that give you more flexibility. We often see this with people who want to sort of leave their company, but not leave it entirely. So they become self-employed and they keep their own company as one possible client. Would you like to work as a self-employed expert consultant for mainly one company, or rather work for multiple clients? With the first option, maybe giving some more security because you can work more in depth with this one particular client, but maybe also some more insecurity because if this one client drops, you have a problem. Or some other options are also combining self-employed with being a homemaker, right? And that's not only true for women, but also true for men. We see this tendency, for instance, in Holland, where the percentage of part-time jobs is way above the average of Europe, and where there's now this concept of the 1.5 job, the 1.5 job per family, which means that between the couple, there is 1.5 points sort of employment. One person maybe works full-time and the other person works part-time to have better quality of life. And very often we also see that these part-time jobs in Holland have also increased in terms of quality. They're not bin jobs, as they call it. They are also good jobs that give good quality of work. So let's look at your votes. I'm curious. Okay. All right, so answers are coming in. We can also see that about 81 people are connected today. That's quite a nice crowd, wonderful. And we're now at 72% of respondents and almost 80. So we can start seeing the tendencies, clear tendencies, right? So I think almost ex aequo number one are working as entrepreneur, family business owner. Wow, so we can see this is where our economy is based on a lot of entrepreneurs who want to start their own business and be independent in that way, but also contribute to the economy. And almost ex aequo is work full-time as a self-employed expert consultant for multiple clients, which might actually correspond with the same thing. So it's clear that the traditional job of working full-time as a salaried manager within one company or as an expert within one company with multiple possibilities is not in the top, clearly, not anymore. They're only around the 10% range. Okay, that's interesting information. And I think it's very important for us to keep in mind here, if this is the audience that will come to our program on business strategy and leadership, we have to take that into account, that maybe we want to help you strategizing around companies you set up. All right, what else? Well, here's some research from Deloitte. It has already about 10 years, I think, but I think it's still relevant. And I think it's relevant in this transition from a more traditional world of people working a career in one particular company to having a career in multiple companies, or having a mixture between having a career as a self-employed person and a salaried person. So the idea of climbing the corporate ladder, as you can see, right, sort of becomes only one of the many options, right? And it's certainly not the one option. So let's take a look at another metaphor that has been used by Deloitte, which is the corporate lattice. So the corporate lattice, you see a picture here, is a career where you can move horizontally. You can actually step back from time to time. You can build in a career plateau. You can step up. You can actually follow the line up like a career ladder, a traditional line, or you can go up for a while and then get a plateau. So there's many ways you can move. You can move horizontally and vertically. And vertically could also mean climbing up the ladder in this particular case. But what's interesting is also that you can build a career horizontally. So maybe rotating or moving towards neighboring disciplines to broaden and open up more your capabilities in order to be able to perform better in your environment. So that's sort of the idea of the new picture that we can have as a transition between what I could call first and second generation management jobs to what I would call third and fourth generation management jobs. So what's important here is to sort of deconstruct it in different pieces, okay? My question for you is, what pace do you want to have? That's the first important question. Do you want to have a high pace of moving forward relentlessly? That probably means that or you're alone or you have a partner who agrees with that, right? Because if you are part of a dual career couple, maybe this other person that you share a life with also likes a high pace, and that's setting yourself up for problems, of course. So which pace do you want to have? Okay. Second question is, do you see yourself rather in the role of an individual contributor, or do you see yourself in the role of a leader? I think more and more there's also an understanding that the only career being a managerial career is over, right? There are other ways where you can have a career as an individual contributor. For instance, having a strong technical focus, but broadening this technical capability and taking on bigger and bigger projects with more and more budgets and more people involved. Take into account also the location. Are you restricted in your location? Does it mean, do you want to stay put in one particular place in the world? Or are you willing to move? Maybe it's not a question of actually moving elsewhere and living somewhere. That might well be the case. It will certainly open a lot of possibilities. It can also be a question of willing to move physically or virtually around the world. And so we can see that the concept of expatriate, which is a dying race, is being replaced by a high frequency traveler who combines high frequency traveling with virtual work. The fourth criterion you should take into account is, what is the workload I want? Do I want a full-time workload, or do I want a reduced workload? For whatever reason you might have. And typically the role or the reasoning is that you take a reduced workload because you want to combine it with private responsibilities. But as you've seen before, as we will see a bigger and a more varied kaleidoscope of possible jobs and combinations, maybe you want a reduced workload because you want to combine it with another job, maybe self-employed, or maybe working for one particular client. Okay, so these are the four criteria you want to take into account in order to rethink what type of job you want and where it fits best. Okay, the classical first or second generation management career used to be hierarchical, so you have to move up the ladder, where each step you move up, you increase your salary, your bonus, and your benefits in function of the bigger responsibility you have over a bigger budget, a bigger region, etc., etc. Okay. The problem there is that basically, since this was the only way to have a career, to stand still is to fall behind. So de-accelerating was not an option, right? It was up or out. If you don't accept a managerial job in your next job, well, it's a pyramid, so the only way up is out. Okay, in terms of location, there was an expectation that you were willing to move from local to global, gradually, but certainly. And in terms of workload, it was clear that if you want to have a career, right, you have to be there physically, or at least you have to be available, and not just during working hours, if you know what I mean, also in the evenings and in the weekends. So this is the classical career, right? And I think clearly the industry asks for something else, and people are asking for something else. So let's take a look at those other options. Okay, so one way of conceiving your career is as a portfolio career. What the hell is a portfolio career? Well, the portfolio career, like you have a portfolio of stock, the logic behind is that you have different stock of different companies that probably have different cycles, so that if one stock is plunging on the stock market, your risk is hedged because you have other stocks in your portfolio, right? So the idea is to have a diversified portfolio. So if something goes wrong with one, you still are covered, you're still safe because of the other elements in your portfolio, right? So you could combine, and actually the person you're looking at right now is an example of that. So not that I'm so interesting, but I'm going to illustrate it with my own case, right? I actually combined being an employee at the University of Antwerp for being also a self-employed independent profession, because I charge Antwerp Management School as an autonomous worker. At the same time, I have my own business, and it's truly a family business because my wife runs it. It's a virtual business. She can run it from home. As such, I'm also an entrepreneur, always looking out for new opportunities. I'm also a parent, and I insist on having my weekends and my evenings for free, so that I can actually interact with my family. And as such, all combined this all together, I have what we call a portfolio career, right? If anything goes wrong in one of those elements, I can still fall back on other elements. So that's sort of one alternative way of looking at careers in this new setting. So what I'm proposing is to go one step further to what Deloitte proposed, and to go from the corporate lattice to the corporate grids, or career grids, which are not even, let's say, within one company. No, they are happening probably within a much broader setting of the ecosystem. And I can see, I have observed this a lot, where people moved from being working in a particular company full-time, accumulating a lot of knowledge there, and then moving over to the other side and to become a consultant, to be an advisor to their own company, or vice versa. I have also seen careers where people started out as consultants, were so good in their jobs that they were headhunted by the companies they were working for. So that's what I mean with career grids. You can move up and down, left and right, as in the lattice, but there's an extra dimension that comes in here, which is you can also move between organizations in those ecosystems and develop different types of relationships with different types of clients or employers. So how would that look like then? Okay, and now I'm not just talking to you as individuals who want to run their own careers. If there's anybody out there, and I think so, I looked at the invitation list, who also thinks as an HR manager or a developmental manager inside of the organization, this is also relevant for you, okay? For each individual, and the example I'm going to give now is not just taken out of a big hat, okay? This is actually also an assignment I did for a particular company in Barcelona, in Catalonia. So what we did in this organization is for each and individual person, asked them in career talks, to what extent do you have an aspiration to have a managerial career? To what extent do you see yourself as a person that has the ambition to lead other people? And when we talk about leading, it's not just managing, it's actually leading. It's also helping them in their development, coaching them further in their development. The second question that we asked all those people is, to what extent do you see yourself in a client-facing capacity? Do you see yourself directly interacting with markets and clients? Okay, and there we also asked the question, to what extent are you willing then to expand this and to travel, because to move from local to regional to global client-facing, to have it very clear, explicit, and on the table. We asked them, what type of workload do you see for yourself? And we actually distinguished 3 categories. We made it very explicit. Part-time, where you can combine it with other stuff. Full-time, with a full-time job being from 9 to 6 or to 7. In Spain, it's quite common to work until 7 in the evening, right? Or actually, are you willing to work overtime? And so this would be relevant for maybe single workers or with people who had already an empty nest, who had their children already studying abroad or leaving the house. Okay, so we distinguished also those 3 categories. Are you willing to also work evenings and weekends and be recognized for that, of course? Then there's a 4th track in this world that is changing so quickly and where we have to be one step ahead. We have to be ahead of the curve if it's possible. We need people who are, if not entirely, then at least partially focused on rethinking the business and contributing more from an innovation point of view and having some role in researching a new possible domain or actually developing products that can be put into the markets in that way. We also asked people to what extent they see themselves more as technical experts and to what extent they wanted to expand the breadth. So would they like to add new expertise to that in a horizontal way? And also the depth. Would they like to deepen this expertise, this knowledge, because things are getting more and more complex. So this is also very welcome. Very much needed. People who want to get even more in-depth knowledge about a certain topic. Right? So based on those different questions, we created profiles for each and every single person. And I'm sorry, this is in Catalan. And so for each person and for each function, right, we defined those different levels. And people could actually, in collaboration, indicate what they were willing to do. Okay. And a function of that, we actually created a whole grid of all the different workers in this particular company. And to have an overview of what each one of them was willing to do. Right? And this really gave the company a really very realistic view of the capacity or the capabilities that Geert was referring to really get a clear and honest picture of that. And the reason why I say honest picture as well is because if you know that people only want to work in a certain configuration, better take into account then they leave. And by the way, this company, not to get into much detail, because they asked for discretion, I can tell you they've been capable, being themselves a large consulting services firm with different disciplines. They've been able to actually attract people from the big 5 consulting firms with this formulation. As you can imagine, because back in the classical consulting firms, it is pretty much still up or out. Okay, so coming back to navigating the 4G grid, the grid and the different elements I talked about. So here are some of my conclusions. Okay, you need guidance. Guidance in terms of which type of career do I want to build. Some of you have a clear idea. We saw this in the poll before, but as you can see, you can go different ways and it's not a one simple career ladder, right? You can move up, down, left and right and into a 3rd dimension if you want as well. So how do you want to build this in the course of a career, right? How do you want to build a portfolio career, hedging the risks, okay? This is going to be radial. Okay, in the sense that probably you will have to define first what is your core identity. Do you identify yourself as a salaried worker working for a company and then build around that? Or do you identify yourself as an entrepreneur and then build around that? Or do you identify yourself as a self-employed autonomous worker and build around that? Do you define yourself in the first and the foremost because of the values you have as a parent, and then you build around that, etc., 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 right? So you start from your core identity, and then you will have radial circles where your level of loyalty and connections and your type of leadership will probably pace down from transformational to more transactional, right? Because you want to take care of this core in the first place. And that's perfectly fine as long as it's clear for anyone else. Okay. Probably you will be interdependent, even if you work in a company as a salaried manager and have the classical career, you will be strongly interdependent with other people, while at the same time you want to create more and more independence. So it's not just true for people who want to look for this independent work setting. And it needs to be integral, right? So you cannot afford to think of your development in only one dimension. So the tendency is also for people to become more polyvalent, to be able to move left, right, up and down. And last but not least, you have to have this really strong interest in constantly thinking about the next step in your development. And the very fact that you're here with us today is probably a very good sign. Congratulations. Keep doing this, because you're allowing yourself to be receiving inputs relentlessly. You cannot stop. Standing still is going back. And I also referred to this self-directed protean career, right? More and more, you will have to take charge of your career. Less and less companies will do this for you. Why? Because they have their own agenda. Right? If they offer you a promotion, it's probably because you're the best possible person around to do this job, the most willing, the most available, the most hardworking, right? If they give you a higher salary, whether in your own company or another one, I can assure you there's a reason why they give you more money, because they take away something very precious, which is your time. It's a very simple tit for tat. So think about this in a very conscious way. What do I want for my own life? Because as far as I know, you only have one of them. Okay, so I now have to finish. I have about 5 minutes left if I look to the left and my right to my colleagues. So maybe I won't have a lot of time to go into this last chapter. You will have to come and attend the course on business strategy and leadership, where we, of course, spent much time to this. But just to give you a very quick idea, right? I just wanted to roll this poll. I wanted to do this before I end. So if you look at what you would consider as your major strengths, right? And here at the same time, I'm doing a poll, but I'm also telling you what's important in terms of self-leadership skills. So we hit two birds with one stone. So what would you say is your strength, your major strength? And in this case, is it correct, Aline, that they can select plural? No, only one. Okay, so you have to choose only one, I'm afraid. So that's going to be a very difficult one. So which one would you say is your major strength, if you choose one? Is it the fact that you have built a strong core of expertise and knowledge around a certain domain? Is it what Geert was referring to before as a strong sense of purpose and direction? You know what you want in life? Is it a strong self-awareness of your own strengths and limitations, which probably also will help you in making the right choices and not jumping further than you can? Is it your capability of self-motivation, discipline, and drive? Is it your maturity? Is it the fact that you have seen so many different situations, environments, worked in already several jobs and had so much experience that you also developed this maturity of connecting with a lot of different people, taking distance from yourself? Is it your emotional intelligence, social intelligence, cultural intelligence of working together with people? Is this your strength? To be a great collaborator in a team or a great leader? Is it the fact that you have a lot of equilibrium in your life? Health is important for you. As a consequence, you're very resilient and you can take on anything. Or is it your social capital? Is it the fact that you have great connections, great network, and more than anything, a good positioning within this network. Because one thing is to know a lot of people, the other thing is also to be a respected member in these communities. So let's take a look at the answers here. All right. Okay, so answers are coming in. We're already at 72% now. So I'll wait a little bit till we're up at 80%, which will probably give us a very clear picture. And it's interesting, right? The number one is maturity level of cognitive and emotional development. Okay, so we have a lot of people online here that want to be entrepreneurs and that feel mature for that in terms of cognitive and emotional development. That's the clear number one. The number two is self-motivation, discipline, and drive. Doesn't make, isn't surprising to me. Hardworking people who can drive themselves, that you need that to be entrepreneurs. And there's also, of course, we should not neglect this, a strong core of expertise and knowledge. It's still up on 15%. So in this list, we have a distribution of different people in different categories. Let me tell you, in this third or fourth generation career, you probably need all of them, right? And it's actually very ironic that the number one is maturity level of cognitive and emotional development, because I'm doing an assignment now, a work now with our chair partner, Melexis, where we actually are investigating, studying the cognitive development of different people in a group of leaders we are working with. And we found a lot of variation. So a lot of people are not aware which stage of cognitive development there actually are, because there are instruments for this. There are qualitative instruments to measure this, to situate people. And of course, that's the one thing you want to avoid, which is to jump into a position or a level of responsibility that doesn't correspond with your level of cognitive or emotional development. Because this is where you can actually break your back, and that's something you need to absolutely avoid. So to jump further than you're actually suited for. And that's a question of being very honest and very honest with yourself. So this is, I'm also glad to have at least 10% of people say they're very much self-aware of their strengths and limitations. Very good. So this brings us to the end. There was more to the presentation, but I will cut it off here because we want to make absolutely sure we also have some time to answer your questions. So I propose we get out of the presentation now and we start taking some questions.
Yes, so first question is for Geert from Evert Jan, who said that he would be interested in some academic insights on the idea of being and feeling proud on your organization and your job. Or perhaps it's a question for the both of you.
I think it's a very interesting question. Yeah, and there is some from strategy management. There is some, but quite weak literature on that. It is important for you as an organization to feel strong, to know what you can do in your business and to actually drive your industry and your business further. And that does help you to position yourself. At the same time, you need to be aware of what your competitors are doing, because if you are not sensitive of all the dynamics that is out there, then you probably will not be that successful. So I think there, it's important that we know how strong we are. But that's from the strategy management literature. Steven, I'm not sure. What about pride and self-awareness? Because you touched upon it, how that is important in leadership.
Yeah, very much so. Because probably pride is an indicator that you truly identify with the purpose and the vision and the values of your company. If you're proud of your company, you feel core to your company and you're willing to probably go the extra mile. Probably this is also very important for leaders to be able to inspire this pride in their collaborators, right? It wouldn't be the first time that I'm called in as a consultant to work with a company where I quickly realized that my major job is to actually pump up this pride again before getting even started. Companies that forgot about why they exist and what an amazing contribution they make to society. They have been fish in the ponds for such a long time that I forgot about it. So absolutely, pride is very important to have as an indicator of the strength of your identity, So you can also look at if there's a lack of pride, probably your identity or identification with this particular company is not so big. So that's something to reflect upon. But it's certainly very, very important for leaders to install this and to instill this, to inspire this in collaborators.
One thing, if I may, on the downside potentially, and there is a huge literature stream on that, is next to pride, there's probably also narcissism. And there is a huge stream of literature on narcissistic leaders. So something that you also should be aware of, or at least have your senses open to avoid that. Yeah.
Yes. As always, there's sort of this curvilinear relationship between having a certain characteristic and being successful. So too much of it is not good either.
Okay. Yes, so then we have a question that arose during the first poll that we did, Steven, from Marina, wondering whether we know that some of the polling options are actually not allowed within the labor law.
Oops. Where are the lawyers?
Okay. Very good, very good point, Marina. And it's clear that you are an expert in a particular field, being HR and law. So thank you for pointing this out. So yes, I apologize if I made this mistake. Probably, if you look at it in a broader way, it's this idea of the combination of being self-employed and being salaried. I guess you're referring to this particular point, which may not be allowed in certain countries. Well, between you and me, I think we both know, right? We're here in Flanders, in Belgium. If there's anyone connecting from other parts around the world, there's also the submerged economy. The black economy, which outside of this country will be much more important than here, right? So in countries around the world where we have not so strict laws, or where people can actually have more flexibility to do this type of things, this might actually be possible. So thank you for your observation. I will be careful next time, and I will take out this option out of the poll. But also take into account that maybe in other countries, the submerged economy is very, very important, maybe as important, and it makes a lot of sense. If your traditional economy has been kicked around so many times, I think, for instance, of colleagues I have in Argentina, you have to look for other options to survive, simply.
And if I may build on that, not from the legal perspective, but from the strategy perspective, I said one of the principles was start with the end in mind. And there actually I refer to the idea of that boundary system. And it's up to you to define your boundary system for yourself and for your team. And having clear boundaries is important. The law, the legislative field can help you in that, but you yourself too. So you can make your own ethical and moral decisions in order to decide what to do and what not to do. And it's one of the elements that goes to the second principle and making these hard choices. But please remain loyal to your own choices. Yeah. Thank you.
You can also build it in the organizations. I remember the classical example of 3M that gave people, I think it was about 1 day a week.
It's a sensitive one, 3M here in Belgium.
Yes,
talking about the 3M.
Yes. But on a different level, they did some interesting things.
It's a free time that you refer to. Also people at Google have time to discuss and to develop more from a very entrepreneurial approach, develop their talent in doing whatever they want that can help the organization and themselves to spin off new type of businesses.
And rather do that. And then what people do anyway, if they have too much slack and too much time and too much ideas, is to develop those ideas offsite to prepare their next step in their career, which is no longer with your company. So you would rather channel this energy, this inventiveness inside of your company. So this type of initiatives, giving people time within the workplace, give access to tools they can use in the workplace to develop new lines of products or services, and award this type of initiative with a very good idea.
And that builds actually on the idea of intrinsic motivation in my simple plan. Because that intrinsic motivation drives on autonomy. You refer to autonomy every now and then in your speech also. I think it's so important that people can build on that personal autonomy, surely congruent with the organization and with the ecosystem that they live in. But yeah, let's unlock that that drive that people have, that autonomy that people have.
So thank you, Marina. Your question provoked a lot of response here.
And we will absolutely go back to our lawyers.
Okay, and actually building on that, Geert, you just mentioned start with the end in mind. There is a question from Stefan saying start with the end in mind is probably the most important thing to define, but for me, it is also the most difficult one. Do you have any tips and tricks to find out what your purpose is or can be?
That's $1 million question, Stefan. Yeah, it's so important. But at the same time, so challenging and not something which is fixed also. As I hope that's also one of the key takeaways of my principles there, that these things evolve over time. And your purpose in life might change over time. It's quite stable for sure, but it can evolve over time. What I can give you as an advice is to try to be aware of your talents and your capabilities. That's one thing. And at the other hand, try to be very aware of who you are and who you want to be as a person, as a team, or as an organization. So being very loyal to yourself is, I think, key. That builds on the idea of self-awareness, I think, Steve, because you cannot have a clear purpose if you are not self-aware. If it doesn't come from itself. So that's the value of a purpose. It is not imposed by others upon you. It's not given to you. Now, your purpose comes from yourself, which gives its strength, but at the same time, indeed, yeah, it makes it also quite challenging for many organizations, for many people.
Yeah, maybe also a tip I could give is, I've been applying this with a few clients now, is to go back to what I call the origin stories. So to go back to the origin. So you can do this at the individual level and ask people, what brought you to this place? Which previous experiences, what brought you to this company? What attracted you to this company? And when people start studying those stories, it's actually quite amazing how much values and pride and needs as well that are in there, but more than anything also aspiration and ambition. And you want your sense of purpose to be aspirational, right? You want your sense of purpose to reach beyond the horizon, because that is what makes people move, to see what's on the horizon and what's beyond. And you can do this also at an organizational level. I've been collaborating with a company. What they actually do is they rebuild the origin, the sort of the values and the purpose that was there in the company from the beginning. They rebuild that based on interviews with founders, with members of the board, but also with employees, to reconstruct that and to communicate that in the first place internally, but also externally. Because it's there. Typically, it's already there. It's just a question of rediscovering it.
And I think that this is very interesting what you say, because that builds also on that idea of being loyal to yourself. It's there. It's there what the founders originally created. But it should also link to these societal trends that you refer to. If you refer to your experience, I also recently helped an organization, quite well-known organization in Belgium and Flanders, in the business of lingerie. So very interesting also later on to talk to my students about this case. And they actually defined as their purpose, making women stronger. And this really, when we found that purpose, and we needed to work on that, it's quite hard work. But once we've got there and we've exchanged the idea of what was behind that purpose, making women stronger, that liberated a lot of energy, not just pride on itself, but also a lot of energy. And you felt people getting inspired by that purpose. So, yeah. It's Stefan, it's a very interesting domain to work on, and indeed it's not easy. There are simple solutions to defining a purpose, but it's worthwhile getting on that journey.
Maybe one last question, also looking at the time, comes from Mr. Rushworth. How much do factors which are perhaps outside of your own control have an impact on how your career progresses? Like, for instance, who do you know? Do you have family connections, etc.?
Can I allow you to start? Sure. And then I'll build on that.
Yeah. Well, a lot, of course. They play a big role. Being there in the right moment, in the right place, to have the right connections, they play an important role. However, in this concept of the protean career, it's the question of also focusing on those things that you have under your control or that you can actually influence. Let's put it in this way, right? I know from a whole completely different domain, which is stress management. I've been dabbling it for quite a long time, doing research in that as well, is that the most important cause of stress is actually a lack of control. So if you focus on the elements that are out of your control, you have a stressful life and you won't make a lot of progress. Right? So I think it's a question of maybe creating 3 categories. Those things that I can control and I can focus on, I can influence. Those things that I cannot control, but I need to take into account. So I have to work around them or have to take them into account. And then the third category of things that are not under your control and you can't do anything about it. So like a pandemic, for instance. I would recommend you to focus on the first 2 categories and not focus too much on those things that you cannot control, factors that are out of your control, because they're not good for your health to start with. And second, it will create a lot of frustrations if you try to control them, of course.
Yeah, and that internal locus of control and looking for those things that at least you can nudge in order to come to the desired direction and live within the boundaries of your purpose. I think that's important.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes. Yeah, I would love to continue this conversation, but I'm afraid time is up.
That's too bad, but yes. It was great having your questions. It was also great talking to you. Eline.
Thank you. So indeed, that brings us to the end of this webinar. Thank you so much, Geert and Steven, for your valuable insights. So that leaves me to say that this webinar has been recorded and you will receive the recording along with the slides via a follow-up email in which you will also find my coordinates, my email address and my phone number should you be interested and should your interest be sparked by these 2 gentlemen's talk today, because as we already informed at the beginning and during this webinar, we will have a program called Business Strategy and Leadership, which will start on November 24th. So if you're really sparked by this talk today, then do reach out and then we'll have a chat and look at how this can fit in your career. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your Monday and have a great start of the week.